Hi.
Hi.
I'm the Bunny Man.
I'm Crazy Susie.
And we are in the Eyes of Terror.
We are?
We are.
Okay.
This is our end of September, beginning of October Terror Talk. So, ghosts. Ooh.
End of September. This is the beginning of September.
This will come out in the end of September, beginning of October. This will end up our month.
Whatever works for you.
Right now I have Crazy Susie tied to a chair because I am wired to get this stuff.
What's that?
It's a Corona Fresca. Guave and lime.
Yeah, I picked out weird stuff.
Well, it's the end of summer and I just wanted to, It contains 4.5% alcohol by volume. It's malt flavored with natural fruit flavors and certified colors. I don't know what that means. It's a premium spiked refresher. So it's imported from Mexico. Guava. So here we go. I thought a light spirit would be our beginning to our talk on ghosts and personal ghost stories and theories. Wow, this is actually quite good. It's like a Fresca, but with alcohol in it. And guava and lime. Alright. So, I've had several ghost experiences. How about you?
One that I thought was, but I'm not 100% sure.
Oh, I forgot to tell. You're drinking your typical Diet Dr. Pepper.
Yeah, I can't drink. It's unfortunate.
Okay.
Loads of rum is going on drunk because I can't drink.
Some dark spirits. So, what was your possibly maybe experience?
I was at home by myself when I was a teen, and at the time when my grandfather would normally come home in the middle of the night, I heard the doorknob on the front door. And the thing is, my grandmother had a bird that he was very attached to my grandfather, and the bird started talking like my grandfather was home. So that's what it made me think of, that it was probably...
And to verify, your grandfather was still alive at this time?
No, he was dead.
He was dead?
He had been dead for close to... He died when I was 10. So at least about 6-7 years. Yeah, because I was around 16, 17 when this happened.
So how does that make you feel? Did you feel like...
I really didn't know what to think, honestly. I mean, at first it kind of freaked me out because I heard the doorknob and I was the only person home. And then the bird kind of made this assumption, and birds are kind of insightful like dogs are. They're very intelligent. So I just thought, I didn't really know what to think. And everything kind of settled down and the bird kind of settled down and everything. So I just kind of went back to what I was doing, the film I was watching. So.
And there was another time where our daughter told us about her experience, but you sort of like, no, that's not. And you know more of the history of this area. And what I'm going to go into is history of another area. But you know more about the history of this area and that particular mausoleum. So if I remember right, she said through secondhand knowledge that her father's girlfriend at the time saw and this is a common thing through this area. I've heard this said multiple times within this area, that this mausoleum has blood on it.
Yeah, just the staining on this granite mausoleum is blood. But granite, if you know anything about granite, it's often, as you know, veining and markings on it. And the top of the mausoleum has, the roof of it has a metal roof. So it could very easily be like rust that's ran down off the roof. It's not blood. For one, blood doesn't stain on a horizontal or a vertical surface. It's a vertical surface. Okay?
And did she say something about like a little girl got ran over by a train and that's how that happened? But there was never any train near that, like that particular...
There's no train anywhere near there. And how would it stain on a vertical surface?
Yeah, towards like the back end, isn't it?
I mean, it could splatter, yeah, but it just... The logic in that story made no sense. There was no train anywhere near there. Near that location. And that wasn't like a blood splatter type stain. It was a very broad, thick staining. Like I said, like maybe rain had ran down from the roof and it had stained a wide rust stain. It was like a water stain down that side of the building. And it happened to be like a rust color. For one, blood, when it's old, it turns black, not rust colored. So that's the irritation, is people make these assumptions and they don't do any research.
But do you recollect exactly what she said? Like she saw, like, I forgot. Do you remember?
Something about she saw somebody there or a ghost or something. I don't know. Lights.
Yeah.
A lighter. I can't recall exactly, but something along those lines. But I kind of just brushed it off because it just didn't make a whole lot of sense.
So there were
details.
So I've heard that they try to clean that rust spot,
Mm-hmm.
and it keeps coming back. So a lot of people think is like a permanent blood stain. I think it might be more of a defect in the marbling, because marble does have defects that may have come up over the past couple of years. It could be rust. It could be a number of things. I'm not 100% sure. I don't think there's a lot of ghostly activity there, because I've been there around there several times and it doesn't feel weird. Okay, so I've had a few ghost encounters, but nothing 100%. So most of the time that I've had these encounters have been when I was by myself. So either it could be, rationally speaking, overactive imagination. There was one time I was with my cousin at the time, and this spans between two different areas. So I grew up in Central Illinois, and I actually used to work at a historical site. And there was 3 historical cabins there. One is a reproduction of the last homestead. The log cabin is the last homestead of Abraham Lincoln's father and stepmother. And it is a reproduction because the original cabin has been lost to time. We don't know whatever happened to that cabin. The history behind it is actually quite fascinating. So this cabin was, after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, this cabin was actually taken down, shown throughout the United States. It may have ended up last at the Chicago World Fair. It may have not. There is, I mean, they said there's 100,000 people that say, I have a piece of the original log cabin. Here's the thing. If you take all those pieces of the original log cabin, you can make a small city out of it. So, we don't know what actually happened to it. So, it's a reproduction. On this property, this is a state historical site. It's called Lincoln Log Cabin, State Historical in Lerna, Illinois, if you wanted to know exactly what I'm talking about. So, there's another home. There's the Reuben Moore home, which is a little bit outside. It's on your way going into the site, and I spent a lot of time there. And it was occupied by a branch of the family of the starting in 1856 as the place of Abraham and Sarah Bush Lincoln's final meeting. It was located about 1 mile north of the main, what is called Goose Nest Prairie site, which is the main site, and is now a former village of the Farmington community. And then on that site, a little bit of a walking distance from the Lincoln Log Cabin site, is the Stephen Sargent home, which is the original. So there's 2 homes that are original and 1 that's a reproduction. And the Stephen Sargent home, built on the site 10 miles to the east, was starting in 1843 and moved to Lincoln Log Cabin in 1987, reflects successful cash cropping farming practices of the 1840s and is meant to contrast with the Lincoln farm. So I was a first-person historical interpreter at this time, and this was actually my first job. But I grew up out there because my mother and father were volunteers. So I volunteered, and then I later on got hired. So I was one of 2 to go to the Moore home on a constant basis, and the good thing about that one is I didn't have to dress up. I could just wear a polo. And then the Stephen Sargent, you have to be first-person interpreter. But a lot less people go to that home. So I worked with a woman that refused, who played the Sarah Bush Lincoln, and she refused to go to the Moore home at any time, day, night, whatever. She refused to go there. And her excuse is that she saw somebody standing when it was locked. So there was a setup of locks that we had, and it would be hard for somebody to sort of break in. And she says she saw somebody standing in 1845, like successful 1845 gear. Now at this time, what we know about the Sargents is they were heavily into spirituality. They also practice a offshoot of Christianity. And when Stephen Sargent died in the home, mind you, this is still the same home that is there, just moved from the original location. His son walked in on his dying father, because he used to die at home, and he said, and he left, and his parents were like, "Are you not going to stay with your father till his passing?" He's like, "It's okay. The room is full of angels."
That's what the son said?
That's what the son said. Like, he said he's in good company. There's plenty of people. There's plenty of spirits in that home, or in that room. So I didn't know this till like towards the end of my time there. Never really freaked me out. But there have been several times where I would have audio in both homes, the Moore home and in the Sargent home, where I would be by myself, just doing my thing. Sometimes, a lot of times, like drawing or whatever. And you have to be, during this, you're interpreting 1845, but you could bring stuff. You just have to be stealthy. If you hear footsteps, because the gravel is very loud, and so you would put stuff underneath baskets of blankets and stuff like that. So you would do this, and so I got really good at trying to see if there's footsteps, and this is at the Sargent home. So I was sitting there, just chilling one day, and I heard footsteps, and I'm like, and they're very distinct. If you ever heard gravel footsteps, and I'm like sitting there, I'm ready to do my spiel, ask any questions, whatnot. I've been sitting there for a good probably 3 minutes and no one showed up, and I thought that was really weird because usually people come make a beeline to the house and then they maybe go out and look at the fallen grounds, which we had a few animals and stuff, and no one came, and I thought that was a bit odd. And there was a few times, it's like that was one time, and I was like, okay, well, it could be I'm making stuff up in my head. There was another time. So it's a 2-story home, and to get it outside you had to go up outside and upstairs, and we locked the door to the upstairs because there is a broken beam. So for preservation and stuff like that, we didn't allow anybody upstairs. And I started hearing footsteps upstairs, and I went to go check out, make sure that somebody forgot to lock up if they got something out. The door was completely locked, solid. I had the keys in my hand. So I thought that was a bit odd. A few scrapings here and there, but nothing to really trigger. Nothing to, like, I was really spooked. I never felt, like, eyes or anything like that. And I think maybe because I grew up out there, that maybe that's why these ghost experiences happened, but they weren't violent. Or they weren't, it was more like, hey, you're here too. It's like, we're together type thing. It's not like, get out. It was more like, so maybe that's my own, if there were spirits, maybe they saw me as one of them because I literally grew up out there. And I didn't do anything disrespectful. I mean, I made sure everything was tidied after my shift. I made sure that the books were in order. Somebody picked them up. So I have a lot of respect for both historical sites and where I work. So that was one experience. I was at the Moore home one time, which is, like I said, about a mile up the road. And this, you didn't have to wear 1845 gear. So you just got a polo with the insignia on it, and you could have your computer, and you just chilled out because hardly anybody ever came. And that's where I had a lot of series of like knockings and stuff like that. Like, and again, footsteps like on the path, but there was no cars out there, so that was weird. I was actually in a tornado up in that house. And actually, what the weird thing about that, I was in a tornado. The site tried to call me, and I couldn't hear anything on the end because this is the day of landlines, and I couldn't hear anything. So I was like, whatever, and I just hung up. And then they tried to call me again. I answered, and it was just dead on the other end. So I hung up again, and I noticed it got really dark and the wind, and there was a part of me that was like, maybe I should go. Because if you grew up in Illinois, they always tell you how to look out for tornadoes and go find a sturdy room or go into the basement. Well, I would have to drive 1.5 miles to get to a basement. So I just sort of stood where in the center of the home is just like a little cupboard area where the phone was located. And to sometimes I do wonder that if the spirits were blocking the call, so I didn't go out there, because I would have ended up in a tornado driving a car instead of being safe within a home that's been since the 1840s.
Right.
So maybe it was protecting, because like I said, I went up there, I did my job, there was no disrespect. I remember I spent a lot of Christmases in that home. I would go up there almost like every other week. So maybe it was just a protection thing. But again, it was like I said, footsteps was a very common thing, sometimes knocking. And again, the upstairs was closed off because we had a lot of historical stuff upstairs that should be messed with. Yeah. So maybe, I don't know, that was my two experiences, and they're both in historical sites there, growing up there. Now, I lived in Pennsylvania for a while, outside of Pittsburgh. Actually, in Pittsburgh to some extent. I went to college in Pittsburgh. Now, my family is Pennsylvania Deutsch. And what I find really interesting is that there's a theory with the Pennsylvania Deutsch that when the Germans came over, which is Pennsylvania German, when the Germans came over from the old world, they brought the despair came with them in a form of mud. Like it was a ball of mud, and all the despair and weariness came along with the Germans, so they can never get away from the despair. And so I've had several experiences there, and one of them was on my uncle's property with my cousin and his grandfather. So anyway, I'm not quite sure about the lineage, but they shared a property, and he used to be an old milker. He used to have a bunch of milk cows and dairy cows, and he had to put down all of his cows at one point because he got sick, and he decided that after that he was not going to dairy anymore. It just became too much of a hassle, too expensive. I don't understand. So we used to go play around, sort of like in the old milking areas and stuff like that. But there was these sinkholes throughout the property that he always told us to be really careful of. You know, don't go out too far out there, stuff like that. But he took the cows out to the sinkholes and just tossed them and covered them. And we were walking out in the woods, me and my cousin, and there was a time where we got so scared that we were being watched every second. We were like hiding behind trees, changing our directions, going closer to the sinkholes, getting further away from the sinkholes. At one point, we just booked it to the house and played pool for the rest of the day. So that was, and again, that was an odd experience.
Crazy.
And then I was living at my grandma's at one time, and I had to turn around on somebody's property, and I just got this sinking feeling as I was turning around, like I wasn't supposed to be there. And at first I heard screaming, and then the realization that it was actually a bird that sounded like a person screaming. But you add in that like screaming aspect into, you know, feeling like you're welcome on this property. And all these homes are like family homes. They've been in the family for generations. There's very few homes up for sale in this sort of region. So that was a fun, freaky thing. And then back to Illinois where I grew up. So outside of where I grew up, there's a small town, and there's this little cemetery, and it's called St. Omar's, and it's hard to find. And then you take the road. It's not really a road; it's a trail for cars, and it's this creepy old road. So on it, so the main reason why this sort of area is known for, this particular cemetery is known for, is because of the witches' cemetery. So it's a really amazing, and me and my dad, before he passed away, used to go to cemeteries and do the rubs, and I have an interest in old cemeteries. I've never had any issues in cemeteries, because as long as you're respectful, you don't have issues. That's what I have found. Like every time I go through a cemetery, like if I'm going to go visit my dad's grave or whatever, I always either turn off or turn down the music or change it to classical. Never anything. It's my mindset. Mm-hmm. My ego project growing up was in a cemetery. I'm very comfortable with the dead. You know, I actually cleaned up a cemetery and put it sort of back on the map, let's say. And I never had any bad experiences. I actually found old gravestones. So hopefully that put some people to rest. Last time I knew, before I left, that they were still trying to figure out what gravestones go with what plots. Because I guess as the gravestones got vandalized and broken, or just with age, they just sort of, the groundskeeper at one point just chucked them in sort of like this walled area.
Crazy.
And I mean, this place was brambled over and stuff like that. It had old brambles over the gravestones. So we cleaned it. Me and my troop cleaned it all up, made it look nice. Had a ghost walk, because a lot of the founders of that town died and was buried there. So we were bringing back their memory of what we did. Never had any problems there. And I stayed out there till well past midnight a lot of times, preparing. So back to St. Omar's. So there's the witch's grave. So it's probably made out of like sandstone or limestone, some type of hard stone. But it looks like sandstone. It's got that sandy look, but it doesn't make sense to be sandstone. So anyway, it looks like it's a square of logs. It looks like it's on top of an orb on top of a square of logs that are built up to about probably 5.5 feet. So because it's about the center of my stomach, which I'm like 6'4", and so it's a pretty large, impressive. And then on that orb is different names, but the one that's predominantly on that one is, I forgot the name, but her death date was February 31st of 18, and then actually disappears. What year exactly? Well, there's never been any February 31st. So maybe, I mean, logically speaking, you could say that the carver flipped 13 and 31, and that's what happened. And forgot to, in the 18 whatever, what year she died. It doesn't matter. My experience didn't happen, but there's theories that you can't take pictures of it, but this is time of photos where they didn't develop. Now there's pictures out on it because digital. So it could be just bad film at the time. It could have been overexposure. It could have been a series of things you deal with that's uniquely in film that you digitally is fine. Although somebody said they did take a picture of it because you weren't focused on the gravestone, they were focused on the people. I mean, you grew up in an area that's small, you get a bunch of urban legends. I never had an experience at the grave, although the grave is actually interesting because the grass is like, it's green, but outside it looks like it's burnt. Like outside of the plot, it looks like it's burnt. And it's like that all year round. So anyway, back to my story. So I was leaving St. Omar's with a bunch of friends because we were deciding to go, let's go graving. Go see creepy graves. Funny story is, too, we ended up in one grave that was on a family plot, and a lot of the graves were breaking down. We got met with a shotgun. Fortunately, she knew who it was. We found out they were making meth in the graveyard.
Nice.
But anyway, back at St. Omar. So I just burnt a new CD. This is back in the day of like LimeWire and burning CDs, and I was playing Dead Souls from the Crow soundtrack on it, and it started skipping as I was leaving. Dead Souls, Dead Souls, Dead Souls, Dead Souls. So I just turned it off because it freaked me out. And then I was like, okay, maybe, and logically speaking, as we got about to the Walmart, Midwest, small town, I turned it back on, and I hit the same track because I thought it was maybe a funk, a screwed up CD. Didn't skip, and I played that CD for like a year. Never skipped in that one area. It was just at that one time, at that one place where it was skipping Dead Souls, Dead Souls, Dead Souls. Yeah. And then when I was at school in Pittsburgh, I lived in the dorms, which was this massive dorm. It was the major dorm where I was going to school at. And it used to be an old parking garage. And you could tell it was a parking garage at one point. They put dorms in a parking garage. because my bathroom literally lined up with the parking lines. My toilet did in one room. And at one end, you could feel the ramp going up, and on the other end, you could feel the ramp going down. And so, it was fun. And I was in my room one time by myself. And I used to live on the 6th floor, and I would hear, during class hours, I didn't have class on this particular day, because I was getting up there enough where I didn't have to have classes all the time. I could have like an off day. So I took an off day. I was in my dorm by myself, and I hear footsteps. And like a lady's high heels. Click-clacking, click-clacking, click-clacking. And then it would go click, and it would come back. And it would go forward, and it would come back. Never opening the door, which I thought was really weird. But it didn't sound like it was above me. It sounded like it was on the ceiling in my room. And so that would happen for a while. And so I moved out of my moved out of my, it was because of one guy. I moved out of that room, moved in with a buddy of mine on the 10th floor. Now the 10th floor, no one is above you. Then I hear click-clacking, click-clacking, the same footsteps, the high-heel footsteps above me. And these are like tall ceilings. So that was weird. And then at night you would hear what sounded like marbles going down the walls. And I wasn't the only one that heard the marbles. I was the only one that I knew. Like my buddy who lived actually right across from me, there was the way it was built was, like my buddy who lived across from me, there was a courtyard. So it was like that squared, like nothing goes there type thing. It was just a blank spot. It was and he lived right across from me, and he said he heard the high heels in his room, on his ceilings. And it would just go back and forth. And then he heard the marbles. Other people heard the marbles. No one knew where the marbles were coming from. That's what killed us all. To go find out, there was always rumors of somebody dying there or whatnot. To go find out, there was somebody who died in that dormitory. When they were making it into a dormitory, a guy who was working on the elevator got decapitated by the elevator. Somehow they overrid the safety protocol or whatever. He had his head out, and the elevator come down as the doors were open and decapitated him. I don't think he wore high heels. He may have played with marbles, but it was just weird. It was just, and you got so used to it. And I came down to my mom's place after break, and it was weird not to hear clip-clapping and marbles. There was a part of me that got so used. That was my life for 2 years. 2.5 years. That was my life of hearing clip-clapping and marbles. That it became so weird to not hear that type of stuff. And no one knew where the marbles came from. That was the craziest part. And that happened on the 6th, that happened on the 10th. It's just straight down the wall.
Weird.
Yeah. So ghost theories are interesting. I've also been to like Gettysburg. I never had any experience at Gettysburg. I've been to a couple of Civil War sites. Never had any experiences there. I've always thought if there was going to be ghosts.
So I guess the blood-stained tomb is kind of like a, what do you call it? Can't think of the term.
Folklore?
Yeah, here you go.
Urban myth?
Yep, urban myth.
Urban legend, whatever.
Bloodstained tomb of Nina Craig Miles, Cleveland, Tennessee. 7-year-old Nina Craig Miles was killed on St. Luke's Day, 1871. A buggy in which she was riding or possibly driving was hit by a locomotive in downtown. Her father, John Henderson Craig Miles, was overcome with grief and had the money to share it. with everyone else in town. He bought the land where both Nina and her mother had been born. It was only a few blocks from Nina's death spot, and commissioned a Gothic revival style church to be built on the property, named St. Luke's Memorial Episcopal Church. It opened on the 3rd anniversary of Nina's death. The church was merely a pretext for what came next, an elaborate neighboring tomb for Nina. The cost $22,000. The tomb $20,000. Built with white Caria marble from Italy, with walls 4 feet thick and a spire over 37 feet high. Nina's mausoleum is sizable enough to qualify as a small house. It was completed in 1876 to 1877. And what remained of Nina was then entombed within a marble sarcophagus, topped with a carving of her body under a fringed blanket, a crown, and a cross. In hindsight, the Craigmiles would have been happier living somewhere other than there. Not only did Nina meet her doom in town, but her father later died after falling on an icy street. And then her mother was run over by a car on another street. Both were interred next to Nina. Interned, yeah. It's unclear when the red blotches began appearing on Nina's white marble tomb, but generations of ghost believers have viewed them as bloodstains and blamed them on the violent deaths of the Craigmiles. Additional lore claims that Caria marble is pure white and never has colored impurities, and that can appear over time. It sometimes does, and that's in parentheses, and that the stained marble was replaced with new marble that stained again, very unlikely, and that a marble statue of Nina later sank on the Titanic, extremely unlikely. These embellishments are unnecessary. The stains in the mausoleum are weird enough. And the presence of a new children's playground behind Nina's tomb just makes it all the weirder. There's another church behind this church. I think it's a Methodist.
I think so, yeah.
And they have like a children's program and a summer school and stuff that they do. And they have a playground in their church.
So what's your theory? Is it?
It's the same thing. I just think it's imperfections
that showed up.
And, just from years of wear. This has been there since 1871. I'm sorry, she died in 1871. It's been there since 1877.
Yeah. The Titanic thing doesn't make any sense.
Folklore, folklore and all. So it doesn't make any sense that it's bloodstained either, because it was built 7 years after she died.
Well, they're saying the violent, but again, it's like...
She's entombed in the sarcophagi. Why would her mausoleum have blood on it?
And the thing is that...
The symbology? Is that what they're going?
I guess, but, if you think about it, back at that time, carriage death was not an uncommon part of colonial life, or that life. It was just horses get spooked, it'd be by a snake or whatever, a loud noise. So going with the spooked horse, so I had an experience. It has nothing to do with ghosts, but we had a mock funeral when I was working out in Lincoln Log Cabin, And my former wife that died was killed by the horse. Got spooked, threw her off the wagon. She got ran over by the wheels of the carriage. That's the backstory. So we had a mock funeral because we had to show what funerals were like back in 1845. And I played the husband because at that time, young love type, marriage was not uncommon. And to have a loss at a young age is not uncommon either. Mind you, I was like 18 at the time. And so as we were having this, so we had a coffin set up, and in that room we had the mirrors covered. Because back at that time, why the mirrors were covered is because there was a belief that the spirits could be entrapped into mirrors. That goes into like another sort of like theory on ghosts and stuff like that we'll talk about. But it was like a 2 days weekend spectacular, if you want to coarsely say it. As we were having this, you could smell something rotting. Like in that room, you could smell something rotting. To go find out, a raccoon crawled up under the cabin and died. So it was just sort of like a funny coincidence of something that we were doing, and a raccoon just sort of crawls up and dies in this one spot at this one particular time. So that was something. There's been a lot of speculation on theories, what causes ghosts, what makes ghosts stay, how they interact. So like in Myrtle's Plantation, there's the tale of the poisoned children by a, I guess, scorned slave who got her ear chopped off, who was the lover of the plantation owner. And the way to get back was to poison the kids, and she would bring them back to health, proving her worth because she was sent out. She was a house slave, but she was sent out after some issues. The issues are, there's a theory that she didn't want to have sex anymore with the master, or she ended up poisoning the kids, took it too far, put it too much poison in the kids' food, and they died. And people say they can see fingerprints in the mirrors and hear voices and stuff like that. So when we see this throughout history, any sort of reflective surface is considered to be an attractor of spirits, either by water, because water at one point, most cultures, was looked at as a gateway to the spiritual realm.
This lady says she is a descendant of the Thompson family. My great father was C. Thompson, was the uncle of Nina. I'm a geologist and have a comment to make about red stained marble used in Nina's mausoleum. I have seen the mausoleum a couple of times. Marble originates from limestone deposited in warm, shallow water. Those red streaks may represent impurities deposited with the original rock. The limestone that were oxidized with the sediment was exposed, hence the rusty color. Just a suggestion.
So going back to the water/mirror concept, I do think spirits can be trapped within mirrors. And I think we've gotten away from that as a society because we don't have at-home deaths anymore.
Yeah.
So it goes into like this one theory that I've heard. They actually made a British movie in like 1970, I think, 1980. It was called The Stone Tapes. Have you ever heard of that? So they theorized that ghosts are sort of like a videotape. So the idea is that the surrounding area, especially if it's tragic or not, is like the impression of the ghost is recorded within stone, mirror, water. I mean, I believe there are ghosts to say, it's just how they're attracted. Because there's too much oddity to be out there to completely dismiss it, in my opinion. But we have to be rational about it. It's easy to be scared of something in the dark alone.
Well, your mind is the most powerful tool that you have.
But there have been videotapes like the young lady that was shot in Gettysburg by a stray bullet who died in her home. And there's pictures and stuff like that of a chain swinging in the basement when no one's there. Devil's Den in Gettysburg is a bunch of rocks. It is a creepy area of Gettysburg. And that was where one of the more tragic events happened of Gettysburg. There was a lot of hard fighting on those stones. And I think the stone tapes, that theory is probably accurate to some extent. That is, tragedy is going to be absorbed, but the stones may have something to do with it, or water, or mirrors. Because like I was saying, like water is, in old culture, is sort of like a gateway to the spiritual life. There's been, like either they toss bodies into the water through sacrificial, or, even today, burial at sea is a very commonplace with sailors.
I think maybe where people might have it slightly incorrect is maybe the red staining doesn't represent the blood of Nina, but maybe it represents the anguish that the family felt.
And that could be very much so.
Because she died tragically.
At a young age.
She was flung from the buggy that her grandfather was driving.
Or, like I said, she may have been driving.
I read more posts from family members, and they said her grandfather was driving it, and he abruptly stopped to prevent a locomotive crash, and she was flung from the buggy and was ran over by the locomotive.
So the part of the locomotive is true, it just didn't happen exactly. She wasn't killed outside like this mausoleum. It was just, that's where things get...
The mausoleum in the church, that's basically the area very close to the area where her and her mother were born.
Yeah.
That area is not tied to her death. That area is tied to her and her mother's birth. And that wouldn't make any sense because there's no train tracks or train trestles or anything in that street.
But going back to the stone tapes, it's quite possible, in theory, that this stone recorded in its own way the despair of the family as they interned this young child.
Right. As a parent that has lost a child at a young age, you carry that with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
They entombed her 7 years later, 6 to 7 years later. So they carried... It took them that long to feel like they couldn't properly put her to rest.
Well, but it also takes time to carve and stuff like that, that...
Right, but her father felt like he needed to do this extravagant thing to give her a proper burial. Yeah. So like you said, he wanted to get imported marble and do this extravagant build to feel like he was going to put her to rest properly. But the mourning and everything that this stone probably absorbed, the pain it probably absorbed, it could have something to do with it. I don't know.
Yeah.
And then the father died shortly after, and the mother and the father died shortly after.
I think what prompts a lot of hauntings is the tragedy behind it. If you die peacefully or at ease, I think it's less likely. I think, if anything, a lot of times maybe the spirits aren't ready to move on from the earthly. I like to listen to like EPVs, but a lot of times EPVs really creep me out. But I was listening to them, but I was listening to one on this YouTuber I really like. It's like Morbid Oddities or whatever, and he was trying to communicate with this young girl that he found this grave. He remembered where it was, but it was all covered up with brambles and stuff where he lived at. So he went back, cleared it up, and he put a crystal on it. He was trying to communicate with it with one of those I don't know the technical term, the voice box, and it said that she was still sleeping. I thought that was a really interesting, and he sort of commented on that ghosts wake up, but it's not, their time is not the same as our time. So she may have died 50 years ago, but she's still not awake. She has yet to realize that she's dead, or come to realization she's dead. So I wonder a lot of times too, the ghosts that we do see, maybe they don't realize that they're not ready to go beyond because they're not waking up yet to the death. And I don't think a lot of ghosts, and this is just me speculating, that a lot of ghosts realize that the environment around them has changed. I think they still live in their world. Whatever tragedy or whatever happened, they're still trapped in maybe the central location. Because there's been enough stories of, like, I always go back to Gettysburg because, you know, I've read so much on, like, the Ghosts of Gettysburg, which is a great book series, that this house was built. But then at some points they would see troops marching through the home.
Yeah.
Like the building didn't exist. And their original path, that house didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there was a lot of tragedies. There was a guy buried underneath corpses for a long time, and he went insane. And he was still alive. He thought he was dead, so he was on the bottom of this corpse pile in Gettysburg in a basement. So his ghost is still there. Sort of like trapped because he maybe can't get past the insanity, the carnage of it all.
Mm.
What's your feelings on orbs?
Like floating orbs?
Yeah, like taking pictures of, let's say, a supposedly haunted ground, and there's orbs just floating. Or stuff that can only show up on, like, film or video or whatever. Like, you can't see it from your naked eye. They're floating orbs because, in theory, floating orbs are spirits of dead without form.
I never really thought about it.
I'm skeptical, but it makes sense to some extent. It just has to be... I think it's easy to, if you have a flash, especially as we know, as photographers, that you have to... Shooting in the dark, it's easier to pick up specks.
Mm-hmm.
And dirt, and a lot of these areas are dust. Like, going back to my experiences growing up back in Illinois, is that we did a haunted hayride, but prior they're like, we took a picture of this cornfield at night and there's a whole bunch of orbs. And I'm like, okay, number one, this is a cornfield in the middle of Illinois during harvest season. Okay, number one, there's a lot of dirt in the air. There's a lot of, like, kicking up stuff in the air. End of September, beginning of October. There's a lot of dirt in the air. There's a lot of vegetative...
There's pollen and everything.
Yeah. And me being skeptical...
What do you think pollen looks like underneath the microscope?
Yeah.
It looks like a little fuzzy ball.
Me being skeptical was like, it's easy to fill in the blanks saying, if you believe that this place is haunted, then yes. But here was the problem. There was too many orbs for people who lived in that area. So why would so many spirits be attracted to that one area? Now you could say because of prehistory and the natives, and I wouldn't say no, but...
You came out there at a different time of year, would there still be that many?
Yeah, I mean, it's like if you would give me a transition of things like midwinter, summer, and that time period, then I would say orbs were still at all seasons, then I would say yes. At different times of the seasons, too. I'll be more okay. I do know that they did find the corpse of a child out there, because at that time it was just an unmarked grave. They just came across it. I mean, we were expecting that. It was a child of one of the original landowners out there. We knew it would pass away, we just didn't know where it was buried. Found out where it was. Well,
just so happened?
Because you buried your home. It used to be a farmland in the middle of nowhere. So you would bury... Family plots are very common in Illinois, central Illinois. There are entire cornfields, and in the center or on the outskirts, you would see a family plot that they would go around because you can't put crops there.
So you have to plant so many yards away from it.
But family homes that have been generational, you see that. It's not uncommon. And when you work in historical situations, it's not uncommon to come across children. Or, I mean, especially because infant mortality was such a common thing. I don't think, though, that was a spiritual thing. I mean, it goes from there. Because it's in the middle of a cornfield. I mean, I had a hard time. So I'm really skeptical when it comes to orbs. But there's one place in Illinois near Chicago, it's called, like, Bachelor's Grove, where it used to be a big dumping ground for, like, mobsters. And they said that they took several photos out there, same with Gettysburg, and they constantly see orbs. I could see that. There's also tales supposedly in Savannah, which I'm not saying is interesting to think about. There is a walking statue in Savannah, Georgia. I believe it's in Savannah, of a young girl. And again, that goes with the stone theory. Maybe she possessed the statue. They actually have to put a glass housing around it. Again, it could be vandals. It could, well, as we see throughout history, both in ancient and modern times, there are ghosts. I think we can say that we don't know enough about the spiritual world, the afterlife, to say definitely if it's true or not. Although I'm on the skeptical side of a lot, I have had my experiences. And this is what a lot of this is just to talk about our experiences, maybe disprove something that we have or the possibility of what we have, but also giving credence to it. It's hard to say exactly. It's interesting. I've always been fascinated in the paranormal. It's just as we advance in technology, I like to see sort of where this goes. But I would say always be skeptical of something, and when somebody's telling you. There's a bunch of ghostly encounters, either in every part of the country. I've had a lot of interesting experiences. I've delved into this world for a very long time, and I think there's a lot of interesting superstition about it, both how to protect yourself from spirits and things like that we've lost to history. We don't practice in today's world. If you're interested in this topic, I suggest a couple of books I find really interesting. The Ghost of Gettysburg is a series. It's a series of books. I think you get those from Gettysburg National Park. I really like the Ghosts of the Great Lakes was a really interesting book. Down to where we live at, the Ghosts of Tennessee, and I know that there's a lot of statewide ghosts. I'm personally looking more and more into like localization. Let's say Ghosts of East Tennessee instead of just a statewide thing. I have noticed that ghosts have been more seen within tragic areas. I'm more on the idea of the stone tape idea, where either despair from the family, like we talked about, tragic events are recorded, and that these ghosts don't see us as much. I think some that they are on repeat, so that's why a lot of ghosts may be more dismissive, and that they are maybe was considered asleep. I think poltergeists are more aware. Maybe they're starting to wake up. They don't like that you're changing their environment because they're starting to see that. So that's where we're starting to get at that with the poltergeist activity. And then maybe the ones that interact are on the final outskirts, and they're awake, they're noticing what's going on, but they're not ready to pass on. I'm a big strong believer of trying to, if you do have ghosts in your home, or if you buy a home, because there's that possibility of it, maybe trying to make peace with them and see what you could do to help, not make them angry. I mean, I've heard people who have rebuilt homes that say that before they rebuild, they sort of try to contact them, or they would just stand in the middle of the room and say, hey, we're going to make these changes for this reason. We're not trying to disrespect you. Our home is your home. And some people say that some ghosts are okay with that, some aren't. Again, it's just each situation is different. I'm no expert in this field, but definitely it's interesting. I mean, I've lived in older homes and stuff like that I've never had any issues with, and we found some interesting stuff in those homes, but nothing has ever arisen of that. But I do like to keep those trinkets if we do find them on our property. Maybe they've lost it and that's what they were looking for or whatnot, instead of just throwing it away. Maybe try to clean it up, and maybe that's a peacekeeping type scenario where our home is your home. We both have to share this space, and here's something from your childhood or your livelihood. Maybe that's the best way to do it. I don't know. But if you have any ghost stories, that's I'd be really interested in hear that. Maybe some point, if you have your own ghost stories, and maybe you can record it, and maybe we could do like you submit it, and we'll put it in our podcast so other people can hear. I think that'd be a fun interaction. I hope that you're ready for the Halloween spirit, and maybe this will get you into that if you're not. If you find this interesting, if you want to reach out, hey, whatever. We're more than happy to listen, interact. All right, you guys have a day, night, morning, whatever time, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week. All right, bye.